Hey, this is David Rovix with another Wednesday noon during the winter little event. And this time it's not a concert, it's going to be a little discussion with Matt Ward, who is a wonderful musician and journalist based out of the Sydney, Australia. And this is, as usual, going out live on various platforms, and it'll be up in podcast form afterwards if you look for This Week with David Rovix, wherever you get your podcasts. And Matt Ward's new album is called Why I Protest, and you'll find it on Bandcamp, mattward.bandcamp.com, Matt with one T, as you can see on the screen if you're looking on the screen. And with no further ado, Matt Ward, hey, great to have you on my little show.
Thanks for having me on, David. Yeah, a radio station described me as Matt Ward with one T, as in doormat, the other day.
Oh, that's really great. So then everybody can think about doormats. That's wonderful association.
Yeah. The kind of guy that gets walked all over. Yeah.
This album, I mean, I know that I guess I have to say for everybody out there, this album is absolutely fantastic. And I didn't really listen to it closely until this morning. I mean, I had sort of had it in the background at some point, or when you first sent me the link, but I didn't give it the kind of listen that I needed to give it. And I did this morning. It's just an absolutely fantastic album. I just have to say that, first of all, it reminds me quite a bit of Manu Chao stylistically.
Right.
But I think the reason why it reminds me, and I haven't even got sophisticated enough to know how to like play songs during live streams, but people can go to the Bandcamp. I mean, it's just one click away, right? Hopefully they'll be tempted to check it out. But like, I think one of the reasons it reminds me of Manu Chao is because of the extremely wide variety of sonic textures and just sounds and styles that you have going from one song to the next. And I mean, and I just also have to say, but just right off the bat, that the only thing I don't like about it is the subtitle, an album based on protest chants, because if you didn't say that, nobody, I mean, I wouldn't think that. And I would just think, wow, I mean, it's like an album based on protest chants, but these songs are all so good, and they get to the essence of what the chant is all about. And you're also doing the chants when the chants are in the songs as part of the chorus. They just seem like great political choruses. And just, I have to just sort of disclose as a political songwriter myself that I write songs a lot based on chants, but I don't necessarily mention I mention after the song, maybe, if anybody's wondering, like that the chant came first, you know. But people often think, oh man, who would Jesus bomb? What a great song. Like they think I came up with that, but of course I didn't. And I didn't come up with what would Jesus do either, which is who would Jesus bomb as a saying was based on this Christian thing. But anyway, it's a fantastic album, and I mean, it's a kind of a big question, but how do you go about coming up with such a wide variety of backgrounds for all the music? I mean, I've worked with DJs, but I've never actually interviewed one, or like how do you do that? It's an amazing process.
Oh, thank you very much. That's a huge compliment. To come up with stylistically this kind of genre that it is, you mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like, well, I was trying to
because I see you're working with several other artists in the credits, and I guess other artists were involved with providing the music, and you're crediting them. And I don't know how much of that is sampled and how much of that is you playing instruments that you recorded.
No,
because obviously it's not live. Right?
Yeah, all the music's written, arranged, produced, mixed, mastered by me. There's one guest on the album, a rapper, who does a chorus on the song Why Are You in Riot Gear? I Don't See No Riot Here. That's an Aboriginal rapper, a friend of mine from the Outback, calls himself an Outback rapper, Lucky Luke.
Great.
But stylistically, I was trying to do something different because the evil Spotify tells me I listen to 350 different genres a year or more. Because I do.
That's got to be a record. I mean,
No, it isn't
that's
actually.
amazing. That's an
No,
amazing
there
number
isn't.
of genres. How many other people listen to 350 genres? Because I mean, it's very evident in your music, and of course, I want to talk to you about music reviewing too, but which is
There's,
obviously why you're listening to 350 different genres.
that's right. There's a guy, but there's also a guy in Canada called Chris who does a Twitter handle called The Ongoing History of Protest Songs. You probably know him. And
Yeah, yeah.
he told me he's listened. Spotify told me he listened to 500 or something. It beat mine
Ooh,
anyway. It beat,
ooh, he's got you beat. He's in the same
yeah,
kind of. He's doing the same kind of thing you're doing in
he's
terms of like massive numbers of album reviews.
yeah, he's listening to tons and tons of music like me. Yeah, tons of different music. So I wanted to do with this album, I wanted to do something that's not been heard before, stylistically. So it's kind of blending drum and bass, which is a very fast form of dance music that I grew up with, going to raves all the time, about 174 BPM. And then it's bringing in another genre called future bass, which is this very sort of cute synthesizer based music. But I've tried to bring sort of organic elements in with it as well. So guitar, a lot of it's based on guitar samples. Um, so with this album, because we were in lockdown, I usually, when I'm out and about, I usually have my laptop in my bag and I'm able to duck into libraries or food courts or whatever with the plug when it starts raining, so I can just get my music done then. You know, I've got a family. I know you've got 12 kids or something. I've got one kid. I've got one kid, that's enough, you know. So you've got to grab the chances where you can to compose things. So because there was nowhere to plug in during the pandemic, you weren't allowed in libraries or food halls or anything. I'd carry my phone in my pocket with a studio on it called Cubasis 3, which is like a digital audio workstation, and I would listen to guitar samples or a little sample that I found here and there, and then I would improvise my own melody over the top of it on the, you know, on the bar of soap sized studio that I was working on, like a little piano on the mobile phone screen, and that way I amassed like 100 riffs over about 6 months, and then I chose the best handful, the catchiest handful that would fit the protest chants that I'd sampled. Um, you know, the
You
ones that
were
would fit the
recording these riffs. You were playing the guitar parts and recording these riffs. Are you saying?
no,
Or
the guitar
where were you getting these guitar parts? I mean, where were you
guitar
finding them?
guitar samples are mostly put
Yeah,
out by sample pack creators. There's some very savvy guys in Atlanta who called Cymatics, who put out tons of free packs. They're like a freemium model where they give a load of free stuff away, and then people feel obliged to buy stuff off them. They've actually become very rich of this model. But a
cool.
lot of those are free samples from them. And so I would take that as inspiration. Often I would throw away the sample after I've, you know, come up with my own riff off of it. Sometimes I keep them, so some of the tunes have guitar and some don't. And then it has then the songs have my own sort of indie sounding vocals over the top of them. I've always got guest rappers on or used voice synthesizers to do my vocals in the past, but all the rappers were telling me to do my own vocals. I hated the sound of
Yeah.
my own voice, as most people do, and it took me ages to get used to the sound of my own voice. But eventually I got over it, and so it's a bizarre mix of you know, drum and bass, future bass, organic guitars, and then my indie vocals over the top. So it's hopefully sounds nothing like anything out there. Manu Chao, that's a great compliment because he's a proper musician. You know, I'm
It's
just a,
great. I mean, I would
yeah,
have made it maybe with your vocals. I would have maybe added a little more reverb or something. But I think your vocals are great, and that was interesting. When I was
all
reading
right.
in the liner notes about how they were telling you you should just do your own vocals because, yeah, it's fantastic,
Oh,
wonderful
thank you.
delivery. Also, I like
Yeah.
the way that you got them blending. You got them kind of, you're doing stuff with studio magic with your vocals as well, which is really fun.
Yeah,
It's
thanks. A lot of people complain that the vocals weren't angry enough, and that's because I was having to do them while my wife and son are asleep a lot of the time. So it's kind of, you know, crouched over the microphone. The one that they really liked was the "Why are you in riot gear? I don't see no riot here." And then I recorded that down in the cellar, and some neighbors started banging on the ceiling, so I
oh
couldn't do that
gosh.
again. Yeah,
Although,
yeah,
if you
yeah. So
wanted to, I mean, I know this is getting kind of technical, so probably of little interest to some people. But
yeah,
if you wanted to
yeah.
remix the whole thing, maybe it is of interest. I don't know. Some of these questions I'm asking are so basic. I'm sure for people who actually know anything about doing mixing and DJing and stuff. But
No, that's
if you
good.
wanted to do a remix version of the album with new vocal tracks, that'd be really easy to do, right? The way you had it. I mean, there's no problem with bleed through the way like the way it is with a lot of folkies recording live, vocal and
Yes,
guitar at the same time.
I could redo the vocals. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's just
I mean,
finding the
I'm not
time.
suggesting you should, but it's like yeah,
Yeah.
these kinds of things are
Next,
easy to do when you're
yeah, next,
recording in such a way.
yeah, next album, I'll try to be more angry.
But
Find a
that
space away from the main.
a bit of a tangent, but I'm curious about that outfit in Atlanta. What's their business model? How do they work? Because I think for any of the musicians out there who are listening, I think they're always interested in this kind of stuff because it's such a
Right.
tumultuous time to attempt to be a musician.
They're called Cymatics, and their website is cymatics.fm. And you spell it Cymatics.fm. And they're really into marketing. One of the guys is really into marketing, the other guy's really into sound design. The guy who's into marketing has read nearly every psychology book on marketing. So freemium is, when you go walk into a sweet shop, you may have seen it in the ice cream shop you work in, where you give away free samples, then people feel obliged to buy. So it's based on that psychology. Humans have always felt obliged to repay the favor because we've evolved to be cooperative. So they give away stuff for free, and they find that people then buy stuff.
People donate. Yeah, yeah. It's
Yeah.
good. I mean, that's the way a lot of musicians are. Well, that's the way I've been doing it for a long time. But that's kind of largely my model. But I'm always curious because sometimes people employ that model, but then there'll be some kind of a limit, or there'll be like exclusive content, or
Yeah.
better sound quality if you pay. These different mechanisms for trying to rope people into becoming paying
That's right.
customers.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, the funnel, as they call it. Yeah.
So, what gave you the idea to do this particular album based on protest chants? I mean, because I don't know was there a particular idea for doing this? Because I mean, as far as I'm concerned, it's just a great album full of great songs that are all very political. But when you mention in the subtitle that it's based on protest chants, and then of course you listen to it,
Yeah.
and with some of it, it's quite evident that that's what you're going for, and others, it's just like it happens to be a protest chant in the chorus, but it doesn't sound like you're fashioning a song around a chant.
No, I did fashion them all around the chants. I chose the catchiest riffs, then the chants that would fit the riffs, the catchiest riffs, and then I wrote all the lyrics around them. But it was inspired by just going to protests for years, as you have been, and hearing the chants, and then hearing in my head a tune that could go with them. That was completely different cadence from what was being chanted. And then I've done like 8 concept albums. I always do concept albums. It always has to have a concept around it for me to get inspired. So there was a new concept that I was looking for, and I just it was a time to do that concept. So that's where it came from. Yeah.
And what about, I mean, now that I really pay attention to your music this morning, I was just, before listening to some of your stuff, I was like, okay, this is cool if people are into electronic music, and I didn't pay enough attention to it. And then
Yeah.
I listened to it more closely, and I realized like you don't need to be into electronic music to get into this stuff. You just need to pay attention to it. First of all, you just really listen to it, and you realize that this is actually not I mean, to anybody who's into different kind of styles of music, and you know that I'm coming from a very acoustic kind of background. Like,
Yeah.
if you're not into the style of music from a distance, it can sound kind of, all the same, to use a really dismissive term,
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
and that's how
Yeah.
I felt actually the first time I ever heard Arabic music, to think of a particular example of a type of
Yeah.
music I really love listening to now. But when I first heard it, I just thought, what the heck is this? There's no harmony going on. I don't
Yeah.
understand it. But then,
Yeah.
then you get into it and you realize like, what it's actually about, like what it is about,
Yeah.
not what it's not about. It isn't about harmonies. It's about a lot of other things, but,
Yeah. Yeah.
but this, but I kind of feel like there is a real connection between the kind of music you make and the fact that you review and listen to so much different music, because what does connect so much of your music is the fact is the sort of, in a way, disconnect of it, like the fact that it represents so many different styles all in one album.
Right. Well, yeah. The reason I started making music is because I interviewed an Aboriginal rapper here in Sydney called Provocals, who's a real radical, pretty hardline rapper down in South Sydney, and he was using all illegal beats, where you rip them off the internet, and so he couldn't put his music on the major streaming platforms and so on legally. So because I loved his poetry so much, I thought, what if I make him some original beats? So I started making hip hop beats for him. Made about 40 beats for him. He made 4 songs out of them, then gave up rapping, but put that out as an EP that's real popular. So I started out doing hip hop, and then went back to my love of doing jungle and so on. But I've also put albums out in a lot slower style, like chill trap. Some of them sound almost classical. I also design like synthesizer controllers for mobile and the iPad, and there's a real huge synthesizer called Omnisphere that a lot of film composers use and so on. So they've been downloading that one, and they tell me they really like my sort of classical, sort of piano-based, sort of ambient sort of stuff, which is the earlier stuff. So it is quite varied in styles, the stuff that I've been doing. It's only the last 3 albums where it's been this real sort of fast, future bassy sort of hybrid sound that you've listened to this morning. Yeah. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, sure. So many different places to go with that. But,
Yeah.
I know a lot of musicians, and I'm kind of probably one of them, who hardly ever listens to music unless it's live music at a gig somewhere.
Yeah.
And,
well, you're so prolific.
although
There would be no time to. You are so prolific. There would be no time to listen.
time, it seems to be part of the thing here, part of the problem. But I don't know I mean, I know other musicians that are kind of like that too, and who might have gone through some kind of a phase of listening to a lot of recorded music and then they stopped. But you listen to a whole lot of recorded music, and because you must have to, because you're writing all these reviews, and I'm guessing for all the reviews you're writing, there's probably a whole bunch of other albums that you're listening to and not reviewing because
That's right.
maybe they're
That's
no
right.
good, and you mostly write really nice reviews. I don't see you trashing people too much. It doesn't seem to be much of your
Yeah.
kind of much interest in reviewing stuff you don't like. But you're doing
Yeah.
a
So
lot of music reviews,
what we're talking about is my monthly political albums roundup for Green Left.
which is usually reviewing 10 albums, right? I mean,
Yeah,
every month.
greenleft.org. At greenleft.org.au every month you can find that roundup. It's the 10 best political albums of the month. So yeah, I do listen to an absolute ton of music, and that is a pretty involved process, and it involves looking at all the album releases every day, looking at the artwork, looking at the song titles, determining from the artwork and song titles which ones might be political, then listening to them, listening to the lyrics. Also, I've got alerts, Google alerts and so on political music and so forth. And then I'm constantly reading the news and emailing myself news items that might relate to the albums that I'm listening to throughout the month. And then at the end of the month, it's all got to be the albums that relate to that month's political news. So I'm selecting only the albums whose lyrics relate to that, what's happened that month in the news politically, and then arranging them in a way where they all are supposed to flow into each other's, so the end of one review will flow into the next. So that's what determines what gets left in and what gets left out, I don't leave the others out because they're rubbish or whatever. It's because I'm trying to fit it to that month's news. But yeah, as often it's about 20 or 30 albums that I'm listening to every month, so I've got to constantly in the background or when I'm cycling or whatever,
So would you say that some of them are rubbish, or by the time you hear about an album and it's one of those 20 or 30 you're listening to, then it's probably not rubbish, right? I mean, because you're mainly listening to albums that have been released and have been recorded on some kind of a label, or there's some kind of a vetting process that's gone into this. It's not usually just somebody put this out and you found it in a cafe.
No, I don't think any music is rubbish. The only things I find painful to listen to are really slick soul R&B, and thrash metal can be a bit difficult when they're roaring out all the lyrics like it's pretty hard. But I don't know. That's
Then
the
you need the
wonderful thing,
liner notes.
you know. And you know what? That's the inspiring thing that partly made me write music. Is I thought, well, if some of these guys are having a go and they're not what a lot of people would deem brilliant, then everybody should be having a go. And that's why I started making music as well, because it was inspiring to hear all those people just having a crack at it.
Yeah, yeah. The DIY ethic that's been long with us since long before
Yeah,
DIY was a term. There's
yeah.
there for anybody who's watching on whatever platform, you are most welcome to comment or ask questions. I can see them all. And one person, Torek, is wondering, how do you decide whether an album is a political album if the majority of songs in it are political?
Just by looking at the song titles, first of all, you can usually tell when you're trolling that day's releases, new album releases, and then you'll dive in there and listen to it very carefully. In the case of thrash metal, as I was just saying, sometimes you have to search out the lyrics because the vocals are unintelligible because they're roaring everything. And then, yeah, it's sometimes just one or two songs will be political. Often it's the whole lot. That, but yeah, sometimes the whole thing isn't as hard hitting as you'd want it to be. Yeah.
But one of the things
People
I
ask
love about
questions.
your reviews is that there's such a wide variety of styles that you're reviewing, and that's another thing I'm
Yeah.
wondering about is like
Yeah.
how did you develop the kind of appreciation for different styles to be able to talk about them like that? Because I mean, for me, if I'm talking about a style of music that I'm really unfamiliar with or that I might not have a deep appreciation for, like I can tell it's political and maybe it's good if you're into it, but I'm just not so into it. But that doesn't seem to be, I seem to have that obstacle as much. I mean, you're not an elitist.
Well, I spent 12 years just listening to drum and bass, jungle, 174 BPM, and going to raves. I'm a cheesy old raver. So I did used to be like that.
Okay.
But I've always been, I mean, I grew up as a kid, I was really into heavy rock and, that sort of stuff. But so I have sort of drifted around genres. But no, it's been an education for me as well, looking at all these different artists, listening to those 350 plus genres a year. And then, yeah, I mean, I do like them all because it's fascinating to music is just a fascinating thing for me. And the more different genres I listen to, the more interesting it is. So in terms of sounding like I'm knowledgeable on it, it just takes a hell of a lot of background reading and so on. So you're reading all the artist's history and the genre, reading up about the genre and so on, and reading about politics and music and what else has been done. I
In the
mean, I started
song,
off making. Yep,
what's that?
I
In,
started
in the
off making
song,
hip hop, and I didn't
oh
really
yeah,
listen
we
to
got a
hip
two
hop
second
before.
delay.
Sorry, I was just saying I
No, you
started off
started
making
off
hip
making
hop,
hip hop, and
and I didn't really listen to hip hop before that. It's enjoyable to make, but it's not something I listen to a hell of a lot, and that's one of the most traditionally been one of the most political genres. A lot of people just think it's punk and hip hop or political music, but there's people doing it in every area. You know.
yeah, it's interesting with this whole thing with hip hop because I mean, some years ago I started doing a lot of like talking my lyrics. Like I did a whole album where most of the lyrics were talked, or at least the verses were.
Yeah.
And I guess they were talked in a rhythmic way, in a way that worked with the music. But it's nothing that I would call hip hop by any means, and I would not claim to be rapping by any means because it just seems like
Yeah.
I feel a little just a little wrong to say I'm suddenly rapping because I mean yeah I've listened to a hell of a lot of hip hop. I mean you can't possibly live in this country without doing that, which
Yeah.
I love hip hop, so I'm not complaining, but like I wouldn't think of myself as a hip hop artist, but then people say, oh, you're rapping, and well, I guess we could call it that if you want, but whatever.
Yeah.
I don't know, but if you called your album hip hop, then I'd be, then I would think, I may think about it, and it doesn't, to me, it does, I don't hear you rapping so much as like doing something, but it's
No,
just whether it's
no, I
singing or
wouldn't call
whatever.
myself.
But
I wouldn't call myself hip hop. That's just what the music I started making instrumentally at
mm,
the start for the Aboriginal rapper Pro Vocals that I mentioned. Yeah, that was just
right,
to make music for him. No, I don't make hip hop. Pro Vocals would actually get very angry about white people appropriating hip hop because it's a black art form, you know.
if somebody has any comments, yes, somebody asked if I can see your comments on YouTube. I can, and if you have any questions or anything else to say, please feel free. Um, I was wondering about on the first track on the album. I believe there's something autobiographical about that, and that is you you're talking about in there when who was born in England and came to Australia, or was that more of a broad sort of statement about a lot of people in Australia?
No, yeah, no, that's my story. That's
That is,
so the
yeah.
lyric, the song that opens the album is based on the protest chant, always will, always was, always will be Aboriginal land. So that's my story and how I came to Australia. So the lyrics start off with, I grew up in England depressed because there's no sunshine. One day a mate said, down under, it's nothing but good times. I said, I've got 1,500 quid because my gran died. I said, let's split the cash and fly to the sunshine. And that's how I came to Australia. And when I got here, it was just completely mind blowing to me because the skies were so blue, the place was so beautiful. The food was amazing, and I actually felt normal for the first time in my life because, I've since discovered I got sad, which is where you get depressed because of the lack of sunshine. So I felt normal for the first time in my life because of the sunshine.
Oh, interesting.
So I wanted to live here, you know. So, and then over time, as I got to learn the history of the country and what's going on today, I got to learn that my feeling normal came at a great cost to the Aboriginal people because they've had their land stolen. And they're not only suffering, from what's happened historically, but they're suffering terribly today, So,
And you have a great song about that on the album as well. About, at least about the aspect of that suffering, which is death in police custody, and that seems to be and then they say accident, we say murder. That's the one I'm thinking of.
yeah,
I
they
think.
say accident, we say murder is the chant that's heard at rallies. Yeah, so the album actually samples the actual protest chants where you'd normally have a bridge in the song, which is like a little
Mm.
different part of the song that's away from the chorus and verse, is where I've put the protest chants. So you hear the real protesters chanting, and yeah, through all the incidences throughout Australia's history and what's happening today, where they say accident, we say murder, is a repeated device that the colonists use, against the Aboriginal people. We accidentally shot the Aboriginal people when Captain Cook showed up. It's an accident that that the Aboriginal people get incarcerated at record rates just because they happen to be drunk. Well, you brought in the legislation that jails people for swearing and drinking. And they're one of the main things that Aboriginal people get jailed for. And then when they get killed in police custody, it was an accident. We didn't hear them ringing the bell for their medication, or we didn't realise there's hanging points in the cell where they can hang themselves. Or we were just trying to, in the case of one guy just recently in a Sydney jail, David Dungay, 5 guards jumped on him and crushed him to death because they said he shouldn't have been eating a biscuit because he's diabetic. They were just trying to protect him. It was an accident. So it's it's shocking, and yeah,
And
that's
what's been happening with like in terms of since the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement in the United States? I know that's had a knock-on effect in a lot of other countries. And has that been has that been evident in Australia? Or because I know that also the movement against to highlight how many Aboriginal people are dying in police custody has
yeah.
been a long-standing movement. But
Yeah, see, a lot of mainstream white Australians look at the Black Lives Matter movement and say, "Oh, yeah, we support that." It doesn't happen in Australia. It happens worse. Happens worse in Australia,
it's
proportionally.
basically the same phenomenon. I mean, it
Yeah,
seems to me coming from here to go to Australia, I see
yeah,
marginalized, disenfranchised
yeah,
minorities.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah. As you'll see worldwide, yeah. But you raised the Black Lives Matter thing on New Year's Eve. This year, just on December 31st, just gone, an Aboriginal rapper called Barker, very strong black woman, performed at the Sydney New Year's Eve fireworks, performed a song, and they were wearing Black Lives Matter t-shirts. And there was a huge outrage in the Murdoch media. How dare they force politics on our children? Yeah, so, and it even made the Daily Express in London, a national newspaper in London that has millions of readers, which was saying the same thing: disgusting to force this politics on our kids. So that's the kind of reaction you get even just by raising the term Black Lives Matter in Australia. Now, not
what
one of
about
those.
what if you raise the term Aboriginal death in custody? Then what happens?
Then they argue
then
that statistically, it also happens to white prisoners. Yeah, but the problem is that they'll say it also happens to white prisoners, but the problem is there are far more Aboriginal people in prison proportionally.
mm,
So
mm.
and then they've got no. Well, maybe we should not be locking them up so much. I mean, it's a device of keeping people oppressed. That's why they're doing it in the first place. That rapper that I was talking about on New Year's Eve, Barker, not one of those journalists who were outraged about them mentioning Black Lives Matter, mentioned the record rates of Indigenous incarceration in Australia, or the fact that she herself, Barker, has served time in prison. And her EP is all about her bouncing back from that because of the strong black women in her life, helping her, to get back on her feet. So she's experienced that brutal inequality herself, and it wasn't even being addressed by the media. It was just, oh, how dare she even mention it?
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the whole situation in Australia in the past couple of years what's going on in New South Wales nowadays, and you got people coming in from other countries, or is it still
They've
sort of an island?
They're opening up the international borders from February 21st, I think. Yeah. So anyone can come in. It's Western Australia is still closed off. Because the premier there, Labour premier, who's also very pro fossil fuels and so on, has found it just really helped him with his popularity to keep the borders closed. Yeah, some high-profile business people have been slamming him and leaving the state in protest. Yeah, that's what's going on. The whole country's opening up on February 21st.
But it's been the experience of the pandemic has been really different in different states of Australia, right? Depending on whether there's been COVID there, because some states have had just about nothing, and others have had a big problem. Is that right? In New South Wales,
yeah.
What's it been like where you are in terms of
New South Wales
have
had a big
you been
outbreak.
able to get out of the house and have go to gigs and stuff like that, or has it been like locked down for central?
No, personally, I've got only one kidney, and it's sort of like 50 kidney stones, and it attacks
Hey.
your kidneys. I've got a chronic disease that means I'm really wary, so I only go outdoors, pretty much.
Right.
So that's my personal story. People are being asked to come back into work, including me. I work remotely, as you can see. I'm working right now, but. It's different for different people. Queensland was in a hard lockdown for ages, trying to keep basically politicians found it to their advantage to lock down and say, I'm here to protect you, like the strong man, strong woman thing that the leaders find benefits them. So they were doing hard lockdowns of each of their states, and then the Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, was asking them to open up for the sake of the economy and so on. But they were finding it too advantageous, in my view, to do the lockdowns because it helped them with their popularity. So we had, the states were very separate in what was happening with them in terms of outbreaks and so on. New South Wales had a big outbreak because they let a load of infected people off a cruise ship, which they later apologised for. That spread it throughout the community. Other states kept their borders hard shut to us. I mean, Victoria had one of the hardest lockdowns, like five lockdowns. But there was a lot of criticism from the Murdoch media for the lockdowns because they're all pro-economy and opening up the economy and saying, it's just a bad flu or whatever. So that's been the situation here. Now, because a lot of Australians actually travel overseas all the time because it's very expensive to travel within Australia.
And a lot of people travel to Australia too. I mean, you at any given time, I mean, in some town in Australia, how many people are tourists and how many are locals? I mean, there's a lot of tourism and a lot of travelers like working there and woofing there and doing all sorts of stuff, right? I mean, one of the things I've heard about in some places that where there was like, where everybody could kind of behave as normal because there wasn't COVID in their area, but where there was nobody coming in from out of the area. In some places that was happening, some places in China, New Zealand, different places. I think parts of Australia, that was the case for long periods where there was things were going on as normal in some area without a lot of, but without any interaction with the outside world. And the music scene sounds like it got kind of interesting in some places, because some music scenes, it's just really normal to have a lot of performers from all over the world or a lot of different places, especially like Chinese hip hop, for example. Like, there's a lot of people who come in from other parts of the world to play in those clubs in China, and it's often the Chinese acts are not the top billing ones. But during the pandemic, it was the Chinese acts from top to bottom of the bill. So did you have any? Is that? But for you, that's all pretty much like, you might have heard about that, but for you, you've been pretty much locked down, trying not to lose your kidney. Is that been your pandemic reality?
That's my very idiosyncratic experience.
You and a lot of other people.
In terms of the music industry here, it's been decimated. The old gigs were cancelled. They keep trying to revive them. The big festivals. The festival scene here is huge. There's tons of music festivals all throughout summer and even in winter. And they kept, getting all the bills together and then having to cancel at the last minute constantly because there'd be a lockdown. And they're not getting much help from the government. So it's been devastating for gigging musicians here. Yes. Mm-hmm. I don't gig, so unfortunately I don't have to make a living off my music. So But when you, assuming the pandemic's over and you can go out and not without risking your life and stuff, do you have any intention on gigging and playing out live or working out live versions of your songs? Because I mean, that especially this latest album, I mean, it would work so well, obviously, at protests. To say it would work well at protests is a serious understatement, because you integrate the chants that they would be chanting anyway, and that people have heard anyway, and that they'll love anyway, because it's about, especially if you're playing at a protest where that's the issue, whatever it is, you got it, you got, and like, you got all these songs, which each one has a particular type of protest that it would be optimal for, of course, but they would often, work in various settings. That's why I was trying to prod you to do a cover version of the album on this.
Then there'd be a live. Okay, well, maybe I'll have to work that out for this. Work out the live.
So you're absolutely right. This album will be great as just a guitar and singing. My
But
guitar playing
karaoke,
ability.
we could do it that way too. Like a lot of hip hop artists would do a sort of a, I mean, they don't call it karaoke, right?
True.
But there's a, that they do that kind of thing where they
Yeah,
have the backing tracks. And if you got a good sound system and that can really
you
pick up
could
the bass
do.
and drums, yeah.
You could do. You could do. Yeah, you're right. You're right. You're right. I mean, my guitar playing ability is stretched to Michael Roll the Boat Ashore, and knocking on heaven's door, and and then I find I spend more time fixing broken guitar strings and tuning the thing than I get to actually practice it. So maybe when I'm 60 or something, I'll be able to perform those songs out when I get more time on my hands. I'll get round to trying to perform them live on the guitar. But yeah, you've raised a good point. Maybe I should just do it with a laptop in the background. Have you ever heard of Sleaford mods? Two guys, one guy just stands there on the laptop
Maybe.
pressing buttons. Yeah,
Yeah,
they're great.
that's common. Yeah. I mean, which is good to have somebody else on the laptop because it's so often it's like the hip hop artist has a USB stick and he's handing it to the engineer and then the engineer, I mean, doesn't necessarily know exactly when is the best time to start the backing track, so if you so then that can be the difference between everything working really smoothly and sounding really professional and
Yeah,
sort of a comedy sketch.
yeah.
Timing.
But as you know from being a live performer, and you don't just show up and wing it. You got to put a lot of effort into honing your craft, and that'd be a whole new time sink for me. I mean, I actually make music just for myself as a sort of therapy to keep me sane. So to concentrate on doing a live show, maybe, but it'd be very time consuming as well, and I don't have much time to do it.
And it might not be therapeutic either. It might kill the whole purpose. I mean, if the purpose is to make music for therapy, then performing could be just another source of anxiety. So they'd cancel each
Yeah,
other out.
absolutely. Do you get anxiety?
Mainly if I'm playing in an unfamiliar setting, like the first time I did a concert for children, I think I sweated more. Seriously,
Right.
I was so sweaty I could barely hold the guitar. I thought I must have looked like I had a fever. I was so
Well,
nervous. They loved it, but I
they're,
was just freaking out because I just didn't know if
they're
they were
a,
going to like it.
well,
I only had
they're
children's
a hard
music out
audience.
online. I had no idea whether they'd actually real children would actually like it.
They're a hard audience. They're a tough. They're a very tough audience.
They're
When
totally
I traveled
honest.
through, I traveled through Southeast Asia and in Laos. I did some voluntary work on a farm, and they asked us to would we come and speak to the local school kids, in English, just to improve their English for an hour, to hold a class for an hour, of 6-year-olds. And me doing this, I was sweating like you.
Yeah.
And some of the kids were lying down on their desks asleep.
Great. They needed a
Yeah,
nap.
yeah, yeah.
This
Yeah,
guy,
yeah,
he's
yeah.
he's going to be leaving. He won't know that I'm napping. Yeah.
They, they weren't interested at all. It's tough. It's tough. Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah. If you had
So how
played
did it go
music
down?
instead of just talking. Oh, it was
How
great
did
because
it?
they love it.
Yeah,
As soon as you start playing music and singing, they just love it. And then when they can see that these songs are intended for children, even if they haven't heard them
yeah.
before, they love them. And if they've heard them before, they love them even more. They love them so
Excellent.
much that they just are like, then they get starstruck and they just can't really quite believe that this person who's music they've been listening to on a CD is here in the room, and then it's kind of overwhelming for
Yeah,
them. So it's kind of
yeah,
better if they haven't heard it before, and if I'm just like coming in, then they just love it
yeah,
without being
yeah,
too starstruck.
yeah, yeah. Well, I'm still starstruck as an adult by some of my favorite artists. But
Oh,
kids can
absolutely.
be kids can be absolutely brutal, and the political monthly political albums roundup that we've been talking about that I do. I was doing it as a podcast until just recently, where I get my 11-year-old son in. So I'd come with my spiel on how the album was so great, and then I'd go, "And what do you think of it, Ziggy?" And he'd say, "It's pretty rubbish." So it was great to have that. It was great to have that brutal honesty on that. But trying to get kids to do anything is difficult. So I had to give up doing the podcast just recently because it was like driving me insane just getting him to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, I had a very similar experience recently working on an album with a hip hop artist, and my kid, I shouldn't mention names, said, "Well, I'm not much into hip hop, so I guess that means I can't really share the tracks because then her attitude will just be, well, I'm not much into hip hop, so okay, I didn't try to.
Yeah.
But yeah, they
Now,
are they
tell me, when you were playing at protest, you have a very different set. I mean, I've seen you play at protest before, and then I was really surprised when you last played Sydney to come and see you in an intimate gig setting that you did, where you inject all this humor, which I was really surprised about because I never saw you as a guy that would joke around. And that really is, if you haven't seen David Rovics live in that sort of setting, I'd definitely recommend going and seeing him because he's really entertaining in that sense. Do you deliberately? I mean, it's hard to joke around at protests, right?
it's hard because you often only have a short time. You're just up to sing one or two songs, and there's something else coming right up. And I think even in that situation, if you can sort of get it together in your head space, it's really good to engage with the crowd and actually talk. And I think in my older
Yeah,
age, I'm a little better at that than I used to be. But if I got the stage now and it's a show and then it's more casual, and then of course talking is part of the whole thing. But
yeah,
it's important, and I enjoy it, and I never think of myself as funny. But then people will laugh, and I'll try to think like, why are they laughing, and see if I can say that line again at some other time. And
yeah,
sometimes it works and other times it doesn't, depending on it might have been just that situation at that moment that it was funny. And
mm,
I often have no idea
yeah.
what's actually humorous.
All crowds will be different. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And do you find they
Yeah.
change from country to
Yeah,
country?
I was just going to mention they changed from. I mean, I was at one at Glastonbury Festival one time. It was, I guess the first time I was when I was touring with Attila the Stockbroker in England, and we were at
Mm,
the Glastonbury Festival playing at the cabaret
yeah.
stage. I think it was the one time
Wow.
I got to play at that stage. And
Wow.
one of the other performers was a comedian from Los Angeles who had been living for some time in England. I don't remember her name, but she was absolutely hilarious. But
Yeah,
all of the
right.
jokes, but all of the jokes were only funny if you were an American living in England. And there were like five Americans in the audience, and we were all just cracking up. We thought she was the funniest
Yeah,
comedian ever.
yeah,
All the English people were just sitting there silently. It must have been horrible for her. They didn't think she was funny at all. But
yeah,
but of
yeah.
course they had never been an American living in England, and there's just
Sure.
it's a limited little crowd. It's a certain crowd.
Sure.
I
Yeah, yeah,
guess it's
yeah,
a big
yeah.
enough crowd in England, in London at least, that you could probably make a living just playing for them. But
Yeah, yeah,
at
yeah.
Glastonbury, it's not so many Americans,
Well,
showing
the
up.
audience would be pretty wasted at Glastonbury as well.
Well, that's true too. But I mean, with the same token, with Attila's humor as being, he's a very funny guy,
Yes.
and,
Yeah.
people are cracking up constantly in England. But
Right.
his humor
Right.
doesn't work outside of England. When he comes here, and his jokes just go right over people's heads
Yeah, sure, sure,
generally.
sure. Yeah, yeah.
Where'd you grow up? Where in England?
In Manchester, in the northwest of England. Yeah, so
Yeah.
it's it's notorious even in England for raining all the time in
Oh yeah,
Manchester.
it's like the
Yeah,
rainiest little section probably outside of in
yeah,
England anyway. In Scotland
yeah.
they get even more rain, but yeah,
So that's why I was depressed all the
cold.
time.
Yeah, cold,
Yeah, yeah.
dark,
It's good.
cloudy, rainy.
A lot of great music comes out of there because people have got nothing to do. They're all holed up inside. Um, whereas here, people are spending the time out in the sunshine and enjoying the outdoors. So the music scene in Australia isn't as strong, I don't think. It's better in New Zealand, just across the Tasman Sea. Brilliant music scene in New Zealand, but terrible weather. Yeah, very
Ah,
changeable
that's
weather.
a,
I lived,
I
I
see.
lived
I
there for
much
four
prefer
years.
the weather in New Zealand, but
Do
the
you? Yeah,
I wonder the music scene. I mean, it seems to me that there is something about the music scene in Australia that where you can feel that you are far away from a lot of other countries where they're playing this kind of music. Like it just seems like
yeah,
uh, like there's by the time anybody gets to Australia, they just there's so many obstacles in their way that probably prevented them from ever getting there in the first place. That most of the performers who are touring and playing any different kind of style of music, you name it, they're never getting to Australia. I mean, so it just
Sure.
ends up being kind of out there. I mean, it is out there, but at least from a European or North American perspective, it's far away.
Yeah, that's true. I'm being harsh on the Australian music scene in general, but there's amazing Aboriginal hip hop here. And now, when I first heard the Aboriginal hip hop here, because I've always listened to radio shows from all over the world, actually, and then I tuned into the local Aboriginal hip hop show. Heard all these amazing artists saying so much, but they were nowhere in the media. They weren't getting any press at all. The people that get the press are the white rappers who are singing
Mm-hmm.
about drinking and partying and sex and love. And this hugely switched on, politically astute, real acerbic, lyrically, very educational music in Aboriginal hip hop wasn't getting any coverage at all. So, with my voluntary work for Green Left, I started interviewing these artists and ended up interviewing 37 different ones all around the country and compiling it in a book called Real Talk: Aboriginal Rappers Talk About Their Music and Country, which you can read online for free. Just Google Real Talk: Aboriginal Rappers Talk About Their Music and Country, and you'll find it on Facebook, where you can read it for free, or you can read it on Amazon, set at Amazon's lowest price of about $1, because you have to charge for it on there. So ended up with this book that's really been very popular, illustrating those amazing artists. So there is some amazing music in Australia. It's just doesn't get the coverage.
And
that's
have you
the problem.
found doing the coverage yourself in terms of doing music reviews and writing the book, you have an impact that way. It's had an impact in terms of some artists getting a little more recognition, or any particular experiences with that?
In them getting recognition, I don't think.
Or just have you ever had the experience of a review or some effort you've made to publicize an album actually kind of like taking off and getting resulting in maybe a mainstream press story that might not have happened otherwise, or any kind of knock-on effect like that? I mean, sometimes it can be hard to measure or be sure what happened and why, but
Not in Australia. The Green Left readers are very enthusiastic about it. The Aboriginal community is very enthusiastic about it, and that they're the people that like it all the time on Facebook. Every day it's getting 10 more likes on Facebook constantly for years. Not from mainstream Australia, no. Around the world, it has. It's been hailed as a must-read by Britain's I Am Hip Hop magazine, and so on. But so people around the world, and that is my experience. From coming from England, all I knew about Australia was it was home to the Aboriginal people, who were the oldest living culture in the world. They're the world famous. And then when you get here, they're not even listened to. They're swept under the carpet. Obviously it's something the colonists don't want to dwell on. And they're brutalized. And so that was really shocking to me. And one of the songs I did on an album called Filterable that I did, which is all about the media. There's a song on there called "They Never See Us as Teachers." And that was inspired by me interviewing an Aboriginal journalist who works for television here on the Living Book program. He started out on the Sydney Morning Herald, but he had to leave because of the way it reported on his people. Whenever the Aboriginal people are reported on, they're treated as a problem to be solved, not as people who can teach, not as educators who should be listened to, but people who are a problem, and we've got to solve this problem. So it's completely the wrong way around. So that song, "They Never See Us as Teachers," I asked the godfather of Aboriginal hip hop, as they call him, or they actually call him the grandfather, like an elder of Aboriginal hip hop, called Monkey Muck or MC Monk. I asked him he'd like to rap on it, not expecting him to do so. And he said, "Great, yeah, I'll do it straight away." And got in his Muslim mate to also rap on it. So it was this, they never see us as teachers because they're also vilified by the mainstream media, you know. So it had this great extra angle to it, and that track's been really popular, being put on Spotify playlists as we were talking about earlier.
Right.
So that's that way that ironically, that guy Monkey Muck, the grandfather of Aboriginal hip hop, has had #1 hit records in Thailand and the Philippines, producing for other artists. And he then taught me a lot of mixing tricks to mix better, you know, to mix my music better, you know, to engineer the tracks better. So we're talking about they never see us as teachers. He was teaching me how to make music better, you know.
And that story of his music being so much more popular in other countries is such a classic one. It was reminding me of when the movie about the Irish Civil War, The Wind That Shakes the Barley, when it came out, it was like in theaters all over Ireland, all over France, but in England, I think it was shown in like 5 cinemas or something. It was just nobody was watching it there. Nobody was showing it. Yeah. But it's a real classic.
Ken Loach doesn't get the recognition that he deserves there. Yeah, for good reason, probably.
Not in England. You know,
No. England's a very right-wing nation. The only time it's voted in Labour really was when Labour went right-wing with the Thatcherite Tony Blair, you know. And that's what...
the 70s were a good time in England. I hear about the 70s a lot from people. I mean, of course, there's so many veterans of the 70s still alive and kicking, and the class solidarity, the kind of the waves of strikes that would go on. But man, the 80s sure killed that.
And then look what happened to Corbyn. You know, they saw that he was about to, almost got voted in, and then the media savaged him to make sure he didn't get in, you know, and spread all the anti-Semitism.
Yes, I'm dealing with that myself. And speaking of which, of cancel culture and whatever else, I'm, especially being home during the pandemic. You got any comments on the toxicity of the internet and how what's it like working, doing music, doing reviews, and then everything else, and writing a book, and then and interacting with folks on social media? Any words of wisdom or any other comments on that?
The internet can be a complete pile-on, can't it? It's like when people get in their cars and they're tooting in the little metal box. So I did do a piece years ago criticizing music piracy, because I read a book by a guy on the value of music and why you shouldn't really be downloading it for free. I know you did a song, steal this song or download this MP3. But that's the one time that I experienced a pile-on, and I was very surprised that people on the left didn't want to pay for music. They didn't want to reward artists for their work. And they saw it as heresy that I was suggesting they should be paying musicians for their work, just like you'd pay any other worker. They were saying information should be free, and so on, and you know, it got pretty vicious. That surprised me.
Lots of personal insults and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah. So
they just get so ridiculous.
And it's it's very stressful, and that's why I sympathise with you with the pile-on that you've been experiencing, because it's not pleasant. It's very it's frustrating because it eats up a lot of your mental space. When you could be doing better things, you know. And then you can look at it the other way, in that most musicians don't get any attention at all.
Right. So then if you get piled on, you're lucky, huh? Turn it to your advantage.
So this is the hilarious thing that I've found in making music, because I grew up thinking, pop stars and rock stars, or anyone who makes music, musicians are really cool. Then when I started releasing my music myself, I read you've actually got to pay for people to like you. So there's loads of artists that are paying for false likes on Facebook, false likes on Instagram, false likes on Spotify. They're paying media outlets to feature them. When I passed this Why I Protest album around media outlets, one said, "Yeah, great album. We can do you a special rate of $600, for a review, or we can do an interview for $1,000."
Jesus, really?
People are buying Facebook ads. I'm sad enough to be paying for Facebook ads to get my Why I Protest album in front of targeted audiences like Rage Against the Machine, Ministry, these sort of big political artists, just to get it listened to. I can write that off on tax, as you know. This is what musicians do. If they get any sort of income, they can write off tax. But there's a guy called Brian Hazard who's a synthwave artist, like synthesizer music, who documents his attempts to get people to listen to him, or to get any kind of likes and followers, or anyone interested in his music. He spends thousands every month and documents it all, trying to get it on Spotify playlists, trying to do T-shirt packages, CD bundles. He's got hundreds of CDs piled up in his.
How does it work out for him?
It's hilarious. It's actually hilarious because he does it with quite a bit of humor, and everything fails. Pretty much everything.
Really?
Fails.
He doesn't end up with a lot of followers, at least?
He has got a lot more followers than me, but I bet he's not got much more than you.
And they're not even real people, half of them, probably.
Well, that's what he also documents. These are actually bots, and this guy turned out to be dodgy, and all these followers I was getting in India, actually, there's no engagement from them. They actually look like they're click farms. He's certainly not in the top 4% of artists on Spotify, I'm sure, as you are. So, and he's spending a hell of a lot of money. I said, "How do you do it? Do you write it off on tax?" He said, "Yeah, it is. Actually, that's how I do it." So this is the world that musicians inhabit. These cool musicians are actually desperately behind the scenes, desperately trying to get them. So nowadays, I probably welcome an internet pile-on, because my following's so minuscule. It's kind of confusing because I'm doing dance music that's political, and hardly anyone who's into dance music, they're into dancing, they're not into politics, really.
Oh, but so, I would think if they actually got onto the dance scene and then they heard that stuff, they'd just love it, because you got to, if they get infected kind of in that, I guess I shouldn't use that term in a positive sense during the pandemic anymore, but if they get like they'll get they'll love it, because it'll be stuff that they can relate to anyway musically, and then it'll, I suspect it's going to go over very well when there's actually a dance floor where that can be played.
Thanks. We'll see.
Well, Matt, it's been great talking to you, and I'll let you get back to work. And
I know they're hassling me. I've got like 5 notifications.
All right,
I've got
you
5
better pay
notifications.
attention. You're on the job right now. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks very much for having me on. Yeah.
Thank you. Take care.
See
you again. And that was Matt Ward. And as you can see on the screen, if you're watching on the screen, or if you're on podcast later, it's Matt Ward, MattWard.bandcamp.com. Check out his latest album, Why I Protest. And this will be in a podcast form shortly. If you look for This Week with David Rovics, wherever podcasts are found. And next week will be my last broadcast of the winter before I hit the road and start touring around, and then I'll do less live streaming until I'm back home again, whenever that might be, that I'm here for long enough time to start getting back into this. I'll probably get back into it soon enough. I'll let you know on my website. And take care, everybody. Keep on keeping on. Screw the cancel culture, and remember, you have value, and we need you. Bye for now.